and market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, the German Chancellor says his government is against hostile and aggressive tactics in the country's banking sector. Merz was speaking to industry executives after Commerzbank formally rejected UniCredit's takeover bid, saying it lacks value and undermines trust. Now, with us now for an exclusive conversation is the Chief Executive of UniCredit, Andrea Orcel. Andrea, thank you so much for joining us. Bettina Orlop, the Chief Executive of Commerzbank, dismissed this as a speculative attempt to dismantle Commerzbank's successful business model. How do you respond to that? And does it definitely close any room for negotiation?
Thank you, Francine. Well, from our standpoint, we have been consistently trying to engage in a meaningful dialogue to review facts as opposed to statements, but we do not believe are backed by facts. As a shareholder, we feel very strongly that we need to be ambitious. We have demonstrated it at UniCredit, and we think Commerzbank can express a lot more value than it does at the moment, both for its shareholders, but also for its employees and the clients it serves. Furthermore, we do think that the current plan puts Commerzbank at risk in the medium term to face a competitive environment, to face risks that would require yet another restructuring plan, and a difficult one, or put the entire bank at risk. For that genuine concern, we have put our views forward yesterday after failing to have any meaningful engagement. And as you know, on April 7th, Commerzbank was very clear that they remained on their position, that the bank needed to remain independent and that there was no value, and refused any further engagement with us.
So where does that leave you? I mean, cross-border bank deals often proceed without management support, but rarely do they proceed without government support, or at least the government saying, actually, this doesn't work for them. Are you prepared to move forward without political support in Germany?
So I hear a lot about this is a cross-border deal, but this is effectively mostly a merger between the second and third largest bank in Germany. And if you look at the views we provided yesterday, most, if not all, of the value comes from the merger of two separate second and third banks in Germany. So it is an in-market deal. It is not a cross-border deal. Obviously, the group is pan-European, and the group would incorporate that bank into the broader group. But it is an in-market merger. With respect to the situation and the position of everybody, we believe we've been very respectful for 18 months. We bought the stake in an auction transparently. We reached 30%. We tried to engage for 18 months. We launched an offer. We tried to engage within the offer to land a joint plan in the best interest of everybody. We were dismissed after 2 weeks with a refusal to engage on any detail. And therefore, we have no other option but to present our views publicly, given that we have an offer document and we need to explain what is in that offer document. Commerzbank was well aware that if we did not present a joint plan, we would have had to come back with a plan from our side. And we restricted that just to our views to provide a basis for further engagement. If that further engagement occurs, we would welcome it. If it doesn't, it is now up to the 70% shareholders beyond us to take a view whether they want to remain in Commerzbank with the current premises or whether they want to do something else. For UniCredit as a shareholder, we have a win-win. If we land below control, this is the scenario that will provide us with the absolute best returns, and in our opinion, will provide an opportunity to do a deal further down the line at much better terms. If instead we get a landslide and we reach control, then we will implement the views that we have put forward, views that we have already successfully implemented at HVB and across 13 banks in UniCredit Group, and we will create value above the cost of equity. So from our standpoint, we've done everything we needed to do in order to be in a position to let shareholders and indeed the other stakeholder of Commerzbank make a decision.
We reported last week that the ECB is considering to require you to consolidate Commerzbank. So how likely is that to happen if your stake rises above 30% but stays below 50%? Would that impact your capital buffer?
Look, the control is a topic that is interpreted differently in Europe, as many other things. In some jurisdiction, you need to be above 50+1. This is, for example, the case of Poland. In other jurisdiction, you need to demonstrate structural control of a shareholder meeting. This, in fact, is the case in Germany. So for us to reach control, we would need to demonstrate structural control of the AGM of Commerzbank, something that we can manage very easily not to do. So we will have really two scenarios, one where we don't have control and we go back to status quo, launch our share buyback, and go back to full focus on implementing our unlimited plan. You will see results of that already in our May 5th results, and wait to see what maps up in Commerzbank. With respect to the impacts on capital, we have been very clear. A 100% deal impacts about 200 basis points. A 50% deal impacts about 280 basis points, excluding the pull to par. So it's 80 basis points more that affects our returns. But in terms of capital position, we have enough capital to absorb both.
What would be the trigger point? So, once you after crossing that 30% threshold, what's the trigger point to then launching a full takeover offer? So,
let's be very clear. In Germany, we have already offered for 100%. So, differently from other jurisdictions, as we have offered to buy up to 100% of the capital of Commerzbank, if we cross the 30% in this offer, we're no longer obliged to do any other offer and can freely buy in the open market as much as we want, all the way up to 100% without ever launching another offer. So if we cross 30% and remain below control, it will be our decision if and when we want to increase that participation to reach control and to move up. And for the time being, I signaled clearly yesterday that after trying this other step to bridge the gap that exists between us and Commerzbank, i.e. launching an offer, if we do not reach control, we will take a pause and we will focus on other topics that we have internally.
I mean, at this point, with what you know now, how many investors from Commerzbank do you think will accept the offer? What's your base case or your baseline?
I normally don't speculate and I use facts. Probably that's why I am cautious when I say some things. In my opinion, it is up to that 70% to take a view. We have shown very clearly what is the financial case to tender. We have put forward our views, the value we can create, and there is now no doubt that we can create substantial more value than what is in momentum, and even more if we reach a combination. The numbers are not challengeable because they emerge directly from what we have already done at HVB and across UniCredit in the last 4 years. So it's our blueprint. We know how to implement it. We will implement it. We will extract those value. We know what we're talking about. So it's only about that. The shareholders will need to decide whether they believe waiting is better for them or tendering is better for them. And I guess we will not know that until the very end of the offer. But as I said, for us, we have reached 30. We've tried to engage for 18 months. We launched an offer in order to have an opportunity for a meaningful, transparent engagement to address a lot of the topics that are now being thrown at us. That, so far, has failed. Commerzbank has remained on the position of day one and refuses to look at any other alternatives. So shareholders are now aware of our views, of the risks, of the possibilities, and they're in a position to take a view. And for the time being, we're here. We would be very glad to engage constructively, but if that is not possible, the offer will run its course and we will see where we are at the end of the offer.
Andrea, your proposals to boost Commerzbank's standalone profitability are, around strong cuts to the bank's international operations. But Commerzbank is also an important source of trade finance for a lot of the German exporting countries. So do you think that could be a problem for those clients?
No, I don't. This is another piece of misinformation. UniCredit has a trade finance business that is about 1.6 billion. This is double the trade finance business of Commerzbank. We support that trade finance business with 20 offices around the world. Our service is fully automated. We use AI, and we have a level of service that gets recognized broadly. Commerzbank has half the business with more than 100 offices, which are a mix and match between trade finance and other activities, such as trading hubs, local lending to local companies that have nothing to do with the core business of a German and indeed the Polish bank. So for us, trade finance is a core business. It is a core business from which we are recognized, and we keep on winning prizes every year for best service in that business. So the last thing we would want to do is affect in any way the Mittelstand access to our trade finance and correspondent banking services across the globe. Indeed, those services are much more efficient, much more effective, and better services than the one of banks that use the old model that we believe Commerzbank uses.
You're predicting 7,000 job cuts at Commerzbank if those plans come to fruition. I mean, is that why unions and also the government are worried about this deal?
Well, on the job cuts, I would say that the numbers that were, again, flying around talked about 15,000. So number one is less than half. Number two, Commerzbank itself has already committed to cut 4,000 jobs, all in Germany, hiring internationally and redeploying headcount outside of Germany. So put that in context with our 7,000, which would be done mostly the first 5,000 or so over a period of 3 to 4 years. The remaining, just in the combination, you're talking 4, 5, 6 years out. There is significant attrition given the pyramid of age, and there is significant reinvestment, and a number of those reductions are done in areas that are very bureaucratic and overpaid, in our opinion, and that need addressing at the center of function that Commerzbank has. So are there job cuts? Yes, they are. I don't think they're meaningfully different from what Commerzbank has proposed. And those job cuts are not done to go and expand internationally and lend in other countries, but they are done to strengthen the business in Germany by investing more in technology, in AI, and redesigning the entire operating machine. The very big difference between Momentum and Unlocked is that Momentum, at the end of a plan, delivers a bank that after they have done those cuts, is still lagging the other peers in Germany and in Europe. Unlocked, at the end of the plan, delivers a bank that is a leader versus the other German competitors and Europe. So Unlock is viable. Momentum will just require yet another restructuring plan to address the gap that would be accumulated again in the next 3 years to vis-a-vis the sector.
Andrea, do you think there's a chance actually that the government, the German government comes out and just blocks it like Italy's government did with Banco BPM?
I cannot speculate on what the government will or will not do. I respect their position. I would have hoped we could have had engagement to explain every topic and every step in detail and argue our case, something that we have unable to do, but it is their decision to make.
What's your thinking about acquisitions in Italy? Are you still evaluating something, for example, with Monte Paschi?
Look, I think our name comes very often in acquisition, probably for two reasons. One, because of my past job, and two, because UniCredit being present in 13 countries and having turned around in the way we have turned around, there is a lot of speculation that we may do a lot of things. So as I said, and I continue to say, we are very committed, and we have demonstrated it again and again and again, to our organic growth. Initially we've unlocked, now we've unlimited. Those two plans have delivered a lot more value, and the unlimited will deliver a lot more value than any acquisition. Yep. That said, I think it is the duty of the leadership of UniCredit to look at option. In Italy, we have a 9.9% market share of the market. The market is fragmented. So there is basis to look at option to strengthen our market share. There is basis, but we need to find opportunities that work, and we need to find opportunities that fulfill our financial metrics. We're very, very disciplined on the returns to be had, and given the success of Unlocked and what I will demonstrate the success of Unlimited in the next 20 quarters, we do not need to make acquisition. We will do them only if they add incremental value.
Andrea, Orcel, thank you so much, as ever, for giving us a little bit of time in your very busy schedule. That was the UniCredit chief executive speaking, of course, to us. And we'll have plenty more throughout the day on this story. The other big story is President Trump has told Bloomberg that he's unlikely to extend a 2-week ceasefire with Iran, which he says is due to expire Wednesday evening, Washington time. Details about the next negotiation session remain unclear. The Bloomberg understands that Tehran is also preparing to send a delegation to Islamabad after earlier casting doubt on its participation. Now, for more, we're joined by Bloomberg's Jumana Bersetchi in Dubai. So, Jumana, just bring us up to date with how likely these talks are and what does it mean for the ceasefire?
Well, I will tell you, Francine, that there are plenty of preparations underway in Islamabad, the city. We're hearing of thousands of security personnel being mobilized, parts of the city in lockdown in anticipation of these talks, but no official arrival yet of either one of the delegations. Now, over the weekend, President Trump himself suggested that the U.S. would be participating, and later emerged that J.D. Vance will be leading those discussions once again. He has not left yet, so that is a key consideration as we think about the coming hours. On the Iranian side, they are still being non-committal. And just in the last hour, the state TV said they have not yet sent a team to Pakistan for these U.S. talks. And what is emerging is a narrative over the course of the evening. We've heard from the likes of the president, Masoud Pezeshkian, who says that they will not negotiate under threat. A similar language coming through from the Speaker of the Parliament, Mohammad Ghalibaf, as well, who led the prior round of discussions, also suggesting that as long as the U.S. naval blockade persists, they will be less inclined to participate in those discussions. So I guess where we go from here is going to be a function of what the U.S. and what President Trump decides to do with that U.S. naval blockade, whether perhaps he lifts it temporarily in order to induce the Iranians to come to the negotiating table. But at the same time, we know that the clock is ticking. He had a phone call with one of our colleagues from Bloomberg yesterday, and he suggested that the ceasefire deadline had moved back by 24 hours to Wednesday evening, which gives a very small window to get a deal across the line. But at the same time, President Trump has also warned that the military is locked and loaded and ready to go again. And equally, the Iranian Speaker of the Parliament has said that they are also preparing to return back to the battlefield. So again, another crucial 24, 48 hours coming up. What we should be watching from here is whether Iran obviously commit to sending a delegation, and also whether J.D. Vance actually leaves the U.S., because that will be a sign that the talks are going to happen.
Jumana, thank you so much. Jumana Bersetchi there in Dubai. Now, plenty of focus, of course, on that U.S. delegation led by Vice President J.D. Vance heading to Pakistan in a bid to resume negotiations with Iran. We're joined now by Anna Rosenberg, head of Geopolitics at the Amundi Investment Institute. Anna, always so great to speak to you. I mean, there are two main sticking points. It's nuclear and Strait of Hormuz. So can we muddle through a deal if there's even a deal to be had?
I think as long as you put the nuclear issue back into this deal, I don't think we're going to get a deal, because this issue is so contentious. We've been negotiating this, the US has been negotiating this for years, and it hasn't been solved. So if there is a deal, and it's a narrow deal, it's going to be no more aerial strikes against Iran by the US in exchange for opening the Strait of Hormuz. That's as possible of a deal as you're going to get. That is. And it is likely that we're going to get this deal, because ultimately you need to look at what constrains both sides. And the fact is that neither the US nor Iran have an interest in more escalation. No. So I think we're going to get a muddy deal that, as I said, is just no more bombs in exchange for opening of Hormuz. The more Trump insists on solving the nuclear issue as part of this, the more difficult it's going to get towards a deal, which then increases the escalation risk.
But Anna, does this effectively give the regime an upper hand? I mean, they're stronger than they were 6 months ago. Of course, there's a new Ayatollah, but because it gives them almost control of Hormuz.
So I'm not sure that they're actually stronger. We don't know how strong they really are. I mean, they've been bombed for several weeks. Don't forget that over the past couple of years, the Israelis have been trying to decimate the militias in the region. They've lost military capabilities. They've reduced their nuclear capabilities. So I'm not sure they're really stronger. I don't think we know enough about that. But the issue around Hormuz is critical for the US, because this is about who controls freedom of navigation. That's a core US foreign policy principle since the end of the Second World War. They can't allow Iran to control Hormuz. They can't allow Iran to implement tolls. So if the Iranians don't back off on this issue, I think the US will have to escalate and will have to send in boots on the ground. That's why this issue is really important, because it would challenge the US on a global level, not just in Hormuz, but also in other areas.
I mean, the rumors that, frankly, have never been confirmed about, for example, the Iranians asking for yuan for the safe passage. I mean, this is not confirmed, but there's always China in the background, right? China kind of supporting quietly, not supporting. They don't like it messy, but they're also not calling Iran and saying, this is it. So what's China's role in all of this?
So firstly, China obviously has an interest in seeing the US being weakened and in trust in the US being undermined. But that's a far cry away from supporting Iran outright. Because ultimately, when you look at what is in China's interest, it is that we see ongoing global trade and we see as least economic friction as possible. Because in China, you have a social contract between Xi and the population, which is, I give you economic growth. In exchange, you give me political control. That has to work based on global exports and free trade flowing. So China doesn't have an interest in seeing the Strait of Hormuz closed for longer. On the contrary, Asia is one of the most affected regions. So I think what we're seeing with Russia and Iran is similar. China has supported Russia and Iran in a kind of lukewarm way. Yes, companies are sending and selling dual-use technology because they're taking advantage. They have an interest in seeing a multipolar world order, but it's not an alliance. And there are real limits for China to go in deeper and support Iran. So ultimately, I think China has been trying to put diplomatic pressure on Iran too. But I think we shouldn't make this bigger than what it is.
And so I don't know what the chance is, you think, of getting some kind of deal. And again, it's a small deal, right? It'd be just for the safe passage of Hormuz. And again, does it flare up until there's a bigger agreement? And how long can that take?
So this is a muddy deal. This is not going to be a clean deal. We have to be clear. It's quite unlikely that we're going to go back to the status quo ante, how it was before the war. Because ultimately, you still have an Iranian regime in place, and the Israelis are not happy with that. They're going to continue to undermine that regime. There are also a lot of opposition forces within Iran, Kurdish militias in Iraq that are not happy with the regime. So we're likely going to see more covert operations in Iran, which means that even if there's a detente between the US and Iran, other forces will seek to destabilize that regime, which means the regime will continue to flex its muscles, threatening the Strait of Hormuz occasionally, threatening the Gulf occasionally. That's the new normal that we all have to accept. It's quite likely that we're going to be in this environment, because a real diplomatic solution to all the issues on the table, the nuclear issues, is very, very hard to achieve.
And I mean, if you're a Gulf state right now, do you have to also deal with Iran, because it's a huge, huge problem for your economy, given what's happened in terms of strikes over the last 6 weeks, or are you actually more anti-US than you were before?
Well, clearly, the Gulf states are looking at this and seeing their business model threatened. There's going to be a persistent risk premium until you actually have regime change. So, and I think, and they tried to improve their relations with Iran before. We've seen this a couple of years ago, after the Trump administration failed to protect them. So they are asking themselves some hard questions right now, and that's why also the risk of escalation is not gone, because as long as this regime stays in place, this business model is threatened. So I think as it's clear, there's still a lot more uncertainty, even though the hot phase of the war, the aerial bombardments, is more likely over than not. But as I said, the more the nuclear issues gets muddled into this negotiation, the higher the escalation risk.
Anna, thank you so much. As always, Anna Rosenberg there, head of geopolitics at the Amundi Investment Institute. Coming up, the dangers to the global economy from both inflation and deflation. We'll discuss that with Dambisa Moyo from Versaca Investments. That's coming up next, and this is Bloomberg. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London, and these are your top stories. President Trump signals he's unlikely to extend a 2-week ceasefire with Iran that's set to expire in 2 days, with negotiations to resume in Pakistan. Apple reveals that John Ternus will replace Tim Cook as chief executive officer after 15 years in the role, which saw the company become a $4 trillion business. Plus, the German chancellor slams hostile tactics in the banking sector. We discussed the pursuit of Commerzbank. We just spoke to Andrea Orcel, the UniCredit chief executive. Now, the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer remains under intense pressure over the appointment of Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the U.S. A top civil servant, Ollie Robbins, who was fired by Starmer over the scandal, is testifying before the Foreign Affairs Committee. So there he is speaking. Robbins saying he was pressured by the Starmer office to appoint Mandelson. I think actually he said that he felt the pressure to appoint him. Starmer's office had a dismissive approach to vetting.
But honestly,
now, as we wait to see if Iran and the U.S. will resume peace talks, the economic consequences of the war continue to spread. My next guest says it's a rare moment, with powerful forces pulling prices in opposite directions. With us now is Dambisa Moyo, principal at Versaca Investment. She's also been appointed an honorary fellow at Oxford University and recently joined the Adam Smith Lecture Series at Panmure House. So, Dambisa, first of all, congratulations for everything that you do. But it's just a very, very unusual moment in time where everything seems in flux. Are we spending enough, long-term attention to what AI does to inflation, deflation, and jobs?
So I would say that this is a very unique time because most business leaders and policymakers haven't had to contend with the issue of inflation since the COVID era. And we haven't really been thinking about deflationary effects, although there has been some discussion about what that might mean longer term. I think what I've been thinking about and writing about recently is the fact that in the near term, so think about the next 6 months to 9 months, we're really facing a lot of inflationary pressures, largely catalyzed by the Strait of Hormuz and the issues around disruptions from energy, but fertilizer, as well as inputs such as helium to semiconductors. Obviously, food production will also be impacted in that respect. That's the inflationary piece. But then longer term, there's a question around deflation, which will be driven by AI. And there's a wonderful chart that has shown that over time, technological changes for consumer goods, telephony, transportation have declined in eras of technology. And this was no doubt going to be quite similar, and that has deflationary impacts, which have effects on bottom lines. I
mean, what I love is that you also, try and find a solution for this. It's not only pinpointing to the problems. Again, whose job is it to make sure that their workforce are ready? You sit on a number of boards. Is it chief executives, or is it up to the governments to first understand the real long-term consequences and also make sure that the workforce is adapted?
So the AI supercycle is absolutely another opportunity for organizations, private businesses, as well as government to come together to try and solve a structural problem that's impacting prospects for economic growth, prospects for living standards over the long term, and then also with knock-on effects for society and how we live. And I think that whereas traditionally we've been working in different pockets, so as a member of the House of Lords, public policy is busy feverishly thinking about this issue of AI in terms of joblessness, in terms of taxes, in terms of what this means for the welfare state. But at the same time, if on corporate boards, we have to think about not just the short-term benefits that might come from right-sizing an organization, but longer-term, the Henry Ford quip of who's going to buy your products. And we have to think about what's the role of corporations in a broad sense in a world where job diminution has become quite popular. So that balancing act is definitely something that is calling for business leaders as well as political leaders to come together to think about what does this look like, not just in terms of where the equilibrium will be longer term, but how do we transition through these challenging periods.
Dambisa, I mean, is there a dislocation? What I like, you're a big thinker, and actually you put it kind of very simply in the sense that there are these two powerful forces and they're opposing forces, right? One is AI and the other one is geopolitics.
Yes.
I mean, this means that we have a very complex world. Where are the dislocations? What are we not thinking about?
So the interesting thing about geopolitics is that there are a number of studies that have been done that say geopolitics generally does not affect the markets. And really what affects the markets when there is some kind of a geopolitical incident is whether or not the geopolitics will affect the path of interest rates. And I think that's an important piece because there have been plenty of things that have happened that you might think would alter the markets, and maybe the VIX will move or there'll be some changes to the 10-year rate. But really, over a long period of time, it doesn't really matter because it has not altered the path of interest rates. In this particular instance, vis-a-vis the war in Iran, we know that there's a 20%, for example, disruption to the supply of energy because of the Straits of Hormuz are disrupted. And that's really quite material because in the past disruptions, the disruption to supply has only been as much as 7%. So this is a really big impact. And we do expect to see that flow through. On the other hand, with the AI aspects, even if you think of energy and fertilizer costs and costs of helium, etc., really eating into margin in the short term, there are longer term questions around what AI will do to business models. What will it do in terms of even deflationary effects and how that might impact debt and the path of interest rates. So I really think about the interest rate being a very important proxy for how we should be thinking about the longer term effects, both of sort of short term effects of inflation, but longer term effects of deflation.
Do you think about debt at all? I mean, again, 2020, COVID, 2022, it's the Russian war against Ukraine, energies all over the place. And we have, the Liberation Day with all the trade concerns last year. And this year is the war in the Middle East. And then you have these underlying kind of like AI issues.
Yes. So I do think about debt a lot, and I think many people do. Obviously, the interesting piece is that it's moved from our concerns in the financial crisis of it being on household balance sheets to now government balance sheets. And there's no doubt about it that the debt problem is not only big, it's also growing. I mean, we just saw in the last week or so that the UK government, or certainly Bank of England, was struggling to, struggling might be too strong a word, but certainly was had to pay up to issue debt. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And there are deeper concerns, the shortening of bond maturities for governments, thinking about what AI might do, and deflation could really increase on a discounted basis, increases the amount of the liabilities. And most of all, I would say, without the prospect of a growth, the question is how do you get out of this debt burden? And I think that's really where the issues lie.
I mean, do you really see a difference between the countries that have energy access and the ones that don't? If you're energy dependent, broadly, you'll be okay, and the ones that don't will be, I think, have structural issues.
We're kind of seeing that now at a very, very, very early stage, because in many respects, I feel like the United States has not yet felt the full throttle of even the disruption in the oil prices. I mean, oil trading as much as over $100. Today it's a little bit off because of the prospect for some resolution. But if you think about it, the concerns around demand destruction destruction, or even policies that will put on a windfall tax or will ration access to food and energy. Those types of implications have already started to come to in Asia. There are concerns about that coming into Europe. So I do think longer term we are going to see this become an issue, broadly speaking. But for now, I think there are some countries that are more energy independent, such as the United States, that are somewhat ring-fenced from these concerns.
Dambisa, I mean, going back to AI, does the U.S. have a natural advantage? I mean, they have all the AI companies, right? It also means that their banks can actually test the models much better than maybe European banks. It means that they understand how it impacts their economy maybe more than Europe. Is that true and fair?
So I think superficially, yes. I think there are many things, a confluence of factors that make the United States very attractive. It's got the innovation. It's got the energy dependency. I mean, there are some issues around that, but it will continue to evolve. It has talent and it has deep capital markets. I mean, I think a lot of that is very sort of bitty in the European context, and which is quite funny to watch your earlier segment around Europe and the reaction towards a long-standing debate about whether Europe can be more integrated in terms of capital markets. But I think that handful of things, public policy that's much more interested in investment rather than risk mitigation. There's a lot of things that come together in the U.S. versus European context that make the U.S. a standout winner. And we see it not just in GDP numbers in terms of the U.S. doubling, or certainly being roughly double the size of Europe today, having been the same size of GDP in 2008. But we also see it in terms of valuations, in terms of liquidity in the markets, IPOs. I mean, it goes on and on. So I think it makes it a standout.
Yeah, a standout, definitely, on more than one metric, as you say. Dambisa, thank you so much for joining us. Dambisa Moyo, principal at Versaca Investments. Now, Mistral AI's chief revenue officer says the company has evolved to become a full-stack platform. I'm losing my voice. There's so much news out there whose advantage lies in customizing AI for enterprise workflows. Now, she says revenue is being driven by large global clients deploying tailored models across industries like finance and manufacturing. Well, I spoke to Marjorie Janowitz about the French firm's global ambitions.
Over the past couple of years, the company has evolved quite a bit to be a full-stack AI company that provides frontier AI models, but also developer tools all the way to apps and compute. So we are offering a vertical stack between model, intelligence, and applications, whereby what we offer to enterprises is the ability to customize the models to their IP, to their tooling, to their knowledge. So we believe that, of course, being frontier AI is important, but what's even more important in order to really drive return on investment in the enterprise is the ability to customize the models to the enterprise context. And that's really how Mistral has become very, very known over the past couple of years, driving value in the large enterprise globally.
So, Marjorie, what's your biggest source of revenue right now, and how are you planning to grow it?
Yeah, our biggest source of revenue right now is very much enabling the large, I would say, enterprise transformation with very big accounts globally. We sell our AI Studio together with AI Forge, which is a tool we launched a couple of weeks ago to enable customization, as I mentioned. All those tools are really able to be deployed everywhere, on the edge, on-prem, in public clouds. And most of our revenue comes with really all those toolings combined with our forward deployment engineering services to really enable multiple use cases in very, very large enterprises in financial services, manufacturing, and public sector. Our revenue comes from all those components combined. And we expect that to continue to grow globally.
And so, you've given us there some of the top use cases. What else can you look at, given also Anthropic's traction has really been driven by these coding agents?
Yeah, so coding is, of course, very important. We also see multiple use cases that are really enabling the transformation in the large enterprise. One of those use cases is very much all around the complex workflow transformation. For the past couple of years, a lot of companies have been struggling to see the value of AI, and it's very much because the models were not adaptable enough to the complex environment of those enterprises. So complex workflow transformation is definitely for us a big winner in the sense of larger enterprises in financial services, for example, trying to transform their KYC process. In manufacturing, we see a lot of enterprises that are really trying to improve defect detection as a complex process. So beyond coding, being able to really adapt the model with the data of those enterprises and enabling them to transform their back office process is very important. Another use case that's top of mind for many organizations as well is a revenue generating use case, being able to really adapt the models to really build opportunities with things that were not possible to do in the past. We custom develop models to language, domain, and culture. You may have seen some exciting announcements, for example, in Asia, where we customized models for healthcare data, knowing also to speak fluently Southeast Asian languages, and that enables really use cases that were not possible to achieve in the past.
Would Mistral offer cloud services to other companies, for example, from its data center?
Yeah, so right now we really go wherever the data of the customer is. It means a lot of our deployments are on virtual private cloud, on premise, and also on the edge. But our willingness is very much to deploy customers in our own cloud as well, with Mistral Compute that we released a few months back. That's also linked to an acquisition we made recently with a company called Koyab, which purpose is going to better enable cloud deployment on our own compute services.
I was going to ask whether you had access to Anthropic Mythos and what you made about the cybersecurity concerns.
Yeah, we're starting to see quite a bit of cybersecurity use cases at Mistral as well. A lot of companies are asking us to really custom develop model and helping them with use cases that are specifically targeted at cybersecurity overall. I have 7 years of cybersecurity myself, so I'm very glad to see Mistral getting into the cybersecurity side of things, customizing models to better enable really safety in the context of AI.
And have you been able to play around with Mythos?
So being a chief revenue officer, I haven't, but we see a lot of our customers that are playing around with it a little bit.
Well, that was Marjorie Janowitz, Mistral AI's Chief Revenue Officer. Now, coming up, Jimmy Muchechetere, the Senior Equity Analyst at Investec. We discuss UK and global equities. That's coming up next, and this is Bloomberg. UK unemployment has dropped unexpectedly in February. It comes as the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, faces more scrutiny over his controversial appointment of Peter Mandelson as US Ambassador, with fired civil servant Ollie Robbins given public testimony in the Commons. Well, let's discuss the UK and the macro outlook with Jimmy Muchechetere, a Senior Equity Analyst at Investec, and John Stepek, author of Bloomberg's Money Distilled. So thank you both for joining us. John, let's just start with the UK, because it feels like we've been saying it's crunch time for a little bit for Keir Starmer. Yeah. But, I mean, in how much trouble or hot water is he now? Whether he knew or not, he should have known about, you know, what his ambassador to the US was up to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's the plainest fact about this. I mean, the conversation with Ollie Robbins today, I was watching some of the select committee hearing before we came in, and it's ongoing just now. And I would say, to be fair, I don't think there's not an obvious smoking gun there in terms of the processes and be able to turn around and say that, oh, this definitely happened or this definitely didn't happen. But that kind of doesn't matter. It really is just another straw in the camel's back. Now, I think what will probably happen, the question now is not so much, do people want Keir Starmer to stay or go? I think it's fairly clear they would like him to go. The question is, can the Labour Party actually get itself in shape to do that? And I suspect that we're still looking at the May local elections as being a trigger for that. Because at the end of the day, we're 3 weeks away from them. So why would you make a move now? The people who might want to line up to replace him will be getting their soldiers in order, and then they'll make their move after May the 7th if they make a move at all. And I think that's the kind of big question.
No.
Whether that matters for markets is a slightly different issue, I must say.
I guess it depends who comes next if he does go,
yeah.
right? Jimmy, overall, there's a lot of... geopolitics is dominating everything. But the markets are quite optimistic. They seem to just want to look through these tensions.
Yeah. That's a good thing. The markets are forward discounting mechanism. And so they priced in the war before it started, when there was the posturing in the Gulf of Oman. And they're doing the same thing now. But part of it is also that the shock factor lessens over time, the sting lessens over time. We keep getting the same headlines, the same, is this happening, is this not happening? And over time, it's got less impact. And so the market moves on. I'm
surprised because no one's telling me that we're going to go back to normal. So, we talk about ceasefire, better position, we're going to be in a better place, but no one's saying, well, we'll go back to what was going on in January in terms of the Strait of Hormuz. I think that is true. That is true. The Strait, as it's showing now, there are so many stakeholders at place that something needs to happen. We probably won't go back to, because if you're Iran, you've suddenly discovered this power that you didn't know you had. But it's interesting. It's also happening in AI, where there's big change, but it's never going to go back to where it was before. Yeah, which is why when we're speaking to Dambisa about these two opposing forces, right, it's AI and geopolitics, and they're not cancelling each other out, but one is deflationary, the other one is inflationary. How much trouble is that for the UK, especially on the energy front, and with this layer of political crisis?
As far as the UK goes, I guess we're a sideshow with this. I think it's really interesting what you say about the market having priced in Iran, and I'm sort of thinking, but they're not discounting anything. It's like those stocks in the US are at record highs. And I think what is perhaps at work slightly is both AI, but also the fact that the bears have been wrong for so long on everything, and now we're at the point where the market needs to see proof. So the market needs a show-me moment from the bears for the bear case, and that really won't happen unless earnings start to show some deterioration as a result of the rising energy price. And I guess the other issue is that we are less oil intensive than we were in the 1970s. So at the end of the day, a $100 oil price, and I realise the oil price is very different depending on what you're actually talking about. But at these levels, it's not as catastrophic as it kind of needs to be. So as far as the UK goes, the UK's real problem is that we don't have governance, and we kind of need governance because all of the problems we've got boil down to things like planning rules, energy usage rules, which are all things that are kind of set by government and need to be somewhat unwound by it. And instead, we've just got our politicians having these ongoing psychodramas, as has been the case, I guess, for about 10 years now. And the problem is, in 2024, people thought that was over, and in fact, it's just been exactly the same. So we're going to get one bad Prime Minister replaced by another one, or not. And I guess maybe markets will just get slightly used to ignoring us.
Jimmy said, the fear of missing out is strong. The power is strong in the markets, and that kind of also is defining it. What happens to dollar and gold? So our view is that the de-dollarization is more of a structural trend, partly related to the fiscal situation in the US, which keeps getting worse, by the way. And this war does not help the situation. But also, it's also the uncertainty around the political side of things. In fact, what's the policy impact that we're going to have? Today, we're going to have a testimony from Kevin Walsh. And one of the questions you have to answer is, does he work for the Trump administration or is he independent, right? So all this uncertainty means that the market participants like us, who are long-term investors, we're looking to diversify. We want to bet on a sure thing over the long term. And this uncertainty means that gold will continue to do well because, the de-dollarization trade is more of a structural one. Jimmy, I keep on getting reminded. Walsh is just one vote. Right,
100%, yeah, out of 12.
So it matters in terms of psychology, but again, the market is kind of anything that the president of the U.S. does that would suggest he's hurting at the central bank independence is ignored by the markets.
Yeah, 100%. I think the key for the markets, from our perspective, is the independence of the Fed, of which the Fed chair is one person, but one of the most important. He gives the casting vote. He can help align some of the other Fed members, in a certain direction. And apparently Kevin Walsh is not one for forward guidance. Yeah. So if there's less forward guidance, then he can work more in the background, if you see what I mean. But for us, it's more about certainty. And I think that's what the market is all about, is what can we get certainty for? And I think that's the part of the conundrum which you mentioned, John, which is the market all-time highs with all this uncertainty. How does that work? Well, if you look at some of the biggest companies in the world, they've got certain tiers of pricing power. So give me $150 oil, we'll pass through that cost. The ones that haven't got the pricing power will suffer.
Okay, in 20 seconds, I live in the UK. Is my margin going up or down?
Oh, God.
I know, 20 seconds. There's nothing like a curveball.
Depends on the Iran war, basically. To be fair, I think interest rates in the UK are pretty high, and the Bank of England would rather cut them. I don't think they're going up, basically.
Okay, I love this. John and Jimmy, thank you so much for joining us. Jimmy Muchechetere, a senior equity analyst at Investec, and Bloomberg's John Stepek. Coming up, an interview with Ukraine's deputy prime minister. That's at 10:15 a.m. London time. Again, a lot of the markets are looking at two things. So the market is pretty much ignoring what's happening in the UK, although there is a big story with the top UK official saying he felt pressure to approve Peter Mandelson. But they're looking at Iran. And again, we're a little bit in a wait-and-see situation. S&P futures gaining 0.2%. Up next, it's Bloomberg Brief, and this is Bloomberg.